Rebekah Roth here again with another story. And again, without notes, I'm gonna just wing this just because it needs to be out there. I may find my notes because I know I took them because I constantly take notes. But I just want you to know this story because it's a story that never came out in the media. And how I know about it is that a gentleman contacted me. It was again probably after the Coast to Coast AM interview that I did in March of 2015. And he was friends with one of the flight attendants that was on United 175. He had two concerns. One, he knew the man very well, and he also knew that he was a black belt in, I think, more than one form of martial arts. He was a kind of one of those people that could kill anybody with their bare hands kind of guy. So he wanted me to know about this guy. So he told me some stories of experiences with him and how short-tempered he was and how unafraid he was to take care of anybody that was giving anyone trouble. And then he asked me if I would speak to his adult son because his adult son had a story to tell. And I said, of course I would. So we exchanged information. And when I had a conversation with this adult son, he told me something that later on, and even including today, really was a game changer for me. And this was relatively early on in my research time. I was probably into it for a couple years. And what he told me was that his father, who was a pretty junior flight attendant, he'd been a police officer for 20 plus years. And then he decided he wanted to be a flight attendant. So he got hired by United and became a flight attendant. And right before, like just a week or two before 9/11 happened, he came home and he took this son out for a drive. And he said to his son, he'd been offered a job with the CIA. Now, as a police officer, he'd worked with the DEA and the FBI and some federal agencies like that. But he said, I've been offered a job by the CIA. The only problem is if I accept this job, it means I can never see you again. And the son was very confused. I think he was like right around 17, 18, right in there. And he was very confused to be told this by his dad. And what he wanted to know from me was, did I think, knowing everything that I know, his dad was still alive? So I asked him, I said, well, let me ask you this. If you know your dad really well, and there were 1, 2, or 3 or 4 hijackers on board the airplane that he was working in flight attendant uniform, by the way, he was working right next to the cockpit door in the first class galley. At the time, I didn't know this. The time I was talking to his son, I didn't know his work position. But that makes it even crazier. He told me, he said, my dad could kill any human being with his bare hands, and he would have done that. And it didn't matter how many hijackers there were, they'd all have been dead. And he knew exactly his dad's training and skill and his personality or his ability to be protective. And as a flight attendant, of course, that is our main job, is to keep a hijacker out of the cockpit. That is the only job we have once a hijacking starts, right? I think you've heard this before if you've heard that video that I've done about hijack training and what should have happened. And I found it really unusual. Later on, because I kind of worked his story into a book, they've come up with a body just in the last few years, supposedly of his father. Now, I don't know what happened to his father, but what I do know is what his son told me. And he said it was just so confusing because he said he'd been offered a job by the CIA, but if he took it, it meant he could never see his son again. Now, he also told me that he had flown his wife to back east to Boston area for the weekend, and he was told that they were signing life insurance paperwork. Well, I happen to know that life insurance paperwork is signed when you graduate from training, and you get your wings and you fill out all your final paperwork. that's life insurance and your next of kin and all of those kind of things that a typical corporation would get. So when your last day of training is basically doing all that paperwork, getting your wings, there's a little ceremony and a luncheon type of thing, and photos are taken. But that's one of the things you do then. You don't do that after you've been flying 6 months or something. That's very unusual. And so maybe I thought, well, maybe they just told him that story. But then 9/11 happened. And so imagine being this young boy who's told that by his father, I'm going to take a job with the CIA, but if I take it, I can't ever see you again. And now all of a sudden you think your dad maybe is dead or not. That's where we went in the conversation. Anyway, I just wanted to get this story out because the thing I found very fascinating about this is in the official 9/11 story, you've never read that Al Marchand, the flight attendant on first class flight attendant on United 175, was a multiple black belt martial art trained former police officer who could kill any human with his bare hands. Never read that. But I did find something that's even more mind-blowing, and I'm going to show it to you on the screen here momentarily. I believe it was the New York Times, on September 13th, ran a story, and in that story, it referenced Al Marchand, but he wasn't working crew. They claimed he was just pass riding. Well, what is pass riding, you're asking? Well, if as a flight attendant I wanted to go from A to B domestically, I could pay the company, and every company's different, so don't email and say I'm wrong, but it might be $10, $5, $20, what have you, for a non-rev ticket, a non-revenue ticket. That's what they're called, non-revs. And we would be pass riding. Those are the terminologies that we would use. And he would have been on the passenger manifest as a pass rider, not on the crew orders as working crew. He went down in history as being working crew member. And let me just tell you this, that the airline would never have given away information about Al Marchand or anybody else that was on their private personal time riding on a pass. And so I said, well, how did they get this information? Well, we now know, I know, and I'm sharing it with you, I hope you know, that the CIA and our mainstream media are one. They're connected at the hip. They're connected at the hip. So when the CIA calls CNN or New York Times or Washington Post, they say, yeah, this guy Al Marchand, he was pass riding. Well, no, he wasn't. And the only way they could have got that information was from who he told his son he was going to go to work for, the CIA. Was this an intelligence operation, not a hijacking? Because now what? What do we have? Hijacker's still alive. An employee at the airline saying he was taking a job with the CIA and he would never be able to see his son again. You see, things are mounting up. And then 2 days after 9/11, September 13th, runs a story about this guy not being working crew. But he was working crew. I see a CIA connection to this story that is absolutely shouting at me. I hope you're hearing it too.